the second painting demo for our abstraction section. You can see here, this one is going to be a little bit more towards the realistic end than the first one. This is the second video in our abstraction section that we are doing. As you can see, I have already drawn out the image using just charcoal, and I have that same red ground. I used acrylic for that on that background space just to get us started. Okay, so I love that contrast that CAD red is going to create for us. This one's going to be approached a little bit different. I have, once again, a variety of brushes that I'm going to be using, but nothing huge. A couple rounds, some flats, some brights, filberts to get that variation. This paint will also take a few sessions, so let's go ahead and get started. Colors I'm using today, I've got yellow ochre, I've got a lemon yellow, burnt umber, ultramarine, and our titanium white. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start out with some of the lemon yellow, and with this one I'll be using a little bit more liquid than I did on the other one. The other one I used a lot more mineral spirits. So this one, for kind of this first coat session, I'll be using more of the liquid. Now this lemon yellow, as you'll see, does not have great coverage, and it's going to take on some of those characteristics of that charcoal that we used to draw. That's okay, but that's also why it's going to take a few coats. I can use that to my advantage. We're doing abstraction anyways, but it is not that final look that I really want from my piece. So this is just that lemon yellow straight out of the tube, kind of just helping me plot out where my forms are going to be. The next stage, I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre and some of the titanium white and mix it in with that lemon yellow. And that's just going to make it a little less transparent, a little bit more opaque, and so I can get a little bit more of that coverage I want. This is still very wet into wet. And I'm just going for bold, flat shapes right now. And that gives us a little bit more sense of what those forms are. You can see that that red versus the yellow, there's a lot of simultaneous contrast happening. So our eyes start to get a little buggy with that. Okay, there's that laid down. While I have my yellows out, I'm going to quick mix up a green. So I'm just going to take using that titanium white, and I'm leaving some of those areas where I want that red to show through. That's really going to bring people in to look at the piece. I'm putting really thickly applied paint on there, so even though I have my liquid in there, I'm still letting those brush strokes really be seen. You can think about areas where you want thick versus thin approach to those marks, and that contrast will be interesting as well. Okay, I'm going to mix up kind of a blue-gray using that burnt umber and my ultramarine, and that's going to be that negative space. I'm going to have it more on the blue side, and I will play up the kind of the texture and the wet into wet look in it as I apply it. But you'll see how that red, number one, is going to make it really feel. And so here's I'm eliminating that bowl, because remember, I don't necessarily need that. I'm going to blue this up just a little bit more. So here we're going to have where our red is going to remain relatively flat, and I'm going to have this blue-gray be much more active in the brushstroke itself. And so that contrast between those two will also add to that feeling of that abstraction. As you can see, it's gotten a little bit more blue. I will change some of the way that that is. It's kind of transitioning right now, but as we're just doing our first coat, this will be fine to get us that sense of that space. And maybe a little bit more white in it on this side. So there you can really see those active brush strokes. You see where I'm still leaving that red underpainting in a lot of the areas. And this is a lot of wet into wet. Yeah, I'm not worried too much about the direction of my paint strokes right now because I know I'm going to go over that one more time. We use the same color within the knife we have down here because remember we're trying to make those seem much more equal. Almost starts to look kind of like a landscape right now. Clean my brush a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and do a first coat of my red too. So I'm going to still use a cad red, basically straight out of the tube, and just kind of solidify this a little bit more. Thinking about those edges. I've got some wet into wet that happen. Go ahead and put this on that whole space. It's okay if I went into that area. All right, and then we've got those blue. Get a new brush. We've got our blue stripes. So again, I'm going to use our ultramarine. Think about just a limited palette with a little bit of white, a little bit of liquid, and go ahead and put those here. All right, so that would be considered basically our phase one of the piece. And maybe we'll do just a little bit more illumination over here. I feel like that red is starting to dominate a little bit too much. Okay. So that's our first layer. We can think about what happens when we start to look at it from this orientation. What happens when we start to turn things upside down as well. And we really start to see how each individual element stands alone. They no longer are lemons and bowls, but we are thinking about shapes, forms, colors, balance within large areas, small areas. Gestural painting versus flat painting. Okay, we'll let this one go ahead and dry, and then we'll do that next session. So I've let this painting dry for a day, and as you can see, for the most part, it is ready to be painted over. So some of the things that I would look at on my second pass of an abstract painting would be things like where are areas that I need more contrast, where are areas that I might want more of a flat paint application, where do I maybe want the activity of the brushwork to stand out more. So this is kind of how I'm going to approach this. When I look at this piece myself, it feels too landscape right now. Part of that I think is just the blue of the sky and the way that we kind of have this horizon line. So that's something that I'm going to work on breaking up today by maybe increasing the size of some of these things, letting them touch and integrate with one another, and that will help break up that space so it becomes something else. One thing with abstraction is that we often will find objects and meaning within a piece that is totally non-objective, non-representational. It's the same way that we do when we look at the clouds in the sky. But because I want to step us away from that, I'm going to try to find ways to manipulate the elements that kind of cuts that illusion. So I'm going to start with some of this yellow that we have going on here. And again, with this piece, I'm going to be using my liquid. I'm using a lot of pure tube, right out of the tube type of paint. And so what I'm going to do today is try to get a bit more, push the scale of these shapes and let them touch and integrate So what's nice is I've got some texture there from the previous day. So I'm going to let that kind of show through in the way that I'm applying the paint. I am doing it relatively thickly, and we'll see how that goes. I'm going to leave this area as it is, maybe kind of break that with, once again, that large scale. And that becomes more of a void then, more of an area that I can see through. And I'm going to cross down and over into this white below and see if I can integrate some of that. And raise that level there. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of white into that yellow, so I have some variation within those forms too. And this is a tough call because they keep wanting to look like lemons, and I'm trying to make them not look like those lemons. But having this value here closer to that white can help maybe let those integrate just a little bit more with one another. Just kind of flatten that out. And we'll do a little bit more on that top plane also. So I'm leaving, you know, that plan behind that I had for my sketch and starting to react more to what I see just in the painting itself. The other thing I'm going to do is kind of beef up some of the dark value over here. So this line work, I'm going to go back to that ultramarine that I have. Maybe just a tiny bit of burnt umber. And bring that in and create some contrast. And get that through this whole area here. And I'm going to use it in some other spots too, to help bring our eye around. So even though that wasn't there before, it might just help create a visual path for us. Just that little bit more. We'll see. I'm going to show you how to scrape everything off too in a few minutes, so we'll see how that goes. And the next part will be really to concentrate on some of this background. I just really am struggling with my love for that blue. So I'm going to go back towards more of the gray and even make my gray maybe a little bit more brown, maybe a little red, warm it up just slightly to get it out of that sky type of feeling. So I'm going to think about how I'm laying this down too, so that I can pick up some of that texture that is already there. And I may take my palette knife and do some of this with that as well. And I really can feel that texture, let that really become more of a primary focus. Here we see that value is pretty close. I'm going to let some of that yellow go right into there. And let's mix up just a little bit more. Give me just a second here. And this one will be not exactly the same, but that's okay. That variation is really going to help us in that visual interest. Yeah, much darker now, but that's all right. Now, wet into wet. Really applying that thick paint. That is looking much better just as an abstract painting. That happens, it's fun. I'm going to relighten this up just a little bit on this corner so we have just a little bit more variation. And this time I'm going to try to hold this just a tiny bit as I'm doing all this mark. And I'll show you some close-ups of this when I'm done too, so that you can see really those areas that become really of interest, to me at least, as I'm creating abstract work. So we're going to take and do a little bit more on this. I want very little of that blue actually left. So I can scrape into that bit. Maybe just a little of that on that side. Much better. I could also take things like my palette knives and make marks, graffito marks, right into the paint. That can become textural as well. Here I can pull some of that red right out that's underneath it, which is a really nice addition to that. And that contrast between that line work versus some of those areas is really exciting as well. We can think about turning and changing the orientation of our paintings and seeing how that makes me read the total composition also. That I start to see how the balance and the rhythm of the whole piece changes when I start to do that. And what I see with this is it makes me concentrate on some of this white and red area. I'd like to bring some of the intensity back to this red, but I think letting a little palette knife bring this white over into that space will really integrate the two, and we might be able to play up some of that spatial line. So I'm going to move it back to this orientation, and let's get some more of that red out. That's our cad red. And we will go ahead and put some of that on there. Maybe we'll start with white first. A little bit of our titanium white. And then we'll do the red on top to let that sit. Okay, so again, I'm going to be using the palette knife. Very little to no actual paint medium in there. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring that across and let that be a little bit more solid. And maybe a little bit of this up on this one too. And don't love that green bit, so I'm going to cover some of that as well. Bring it down here and down here. And that's got a lot of texture to it right there, which is great. It's going to take a while for it to dry, but that texture is really nice. All right, let's grab some cad red. And we'll put a little bit of that on. This I'm going to go ahead and brush on a little bit of liquid because I want that area flat. I want that contrast of all this activity to this area here, that when I get up close, sure, I'll be able to see that brushwork, but I want the viewer to read it as a real solid color from afar. Need a little bit more. You can hear the chicken in the background. Again, there's some texture going on. And bring this right to that edge. Maybe change that shape just slightly. Kind of cut into it a little bit more. And something to that effect. And I think I'm going to bring out that little bit of red that we see peeking through here and up here with some direct painting on that. So this I'm just going to give us a little direct blob that will help us connect those two spaces. Here we've got the red peeking back through, and then here also just a little bit more. Let's see that one? No good. I'm going to put some white right over top of that because that really did not help us at all. A little correction in there. Bringing some of that blue line back over top of it. And you see these are really, these decisions that I'm making occur really quickly. I read the totality of the piece. And that's not bad. We're going to leave it right about there. I want to bring just a little bit more kind of this blue into this part here. And something like that. we're fairly balanced. There's a lot of integration between active areas versus these flat spaces. As the viewer looks at it, they come up and in. Their eye travels to these dark areas, can come up over these curved places, come back out. We are moved around by red, little red lines, tiny little areas peeking through. This is what you want from an abstract painting, that you want your eye to make all those movements, all those adjustments. Because we don't have recognizable objects that we are invested in, that we need to see how are those materials moving and manipulating the viewer. Okay, so this would be about where I would stop for this one. If I want to do more, I would let this dry because I do have some really thick paint areas, but I would revisit it and see if it needs more adjustments within that.